first have Dr. Arunabha Ghosh. He is CEO of the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, an independent policy research institution that he's conceptualized to address pressing global challenges through an integrated approach. With experience in 30 countries and having formerly worked at UNDP, WTO, Princeton and Oxford, Dr. Ghosh's work intersects international relations, global governance and human development, including climate, energy, water, trade and conflict. Dr. Ghosh.
Good afternoon. First of all, many thanks to Godrej Good Green for inviting me. Second of all, thanks to many of you for being here. It's not easy to talk about very difficult issues on the one day you have off, Saturday. And as we've seen right through the morning, as well as the film that we all just watched, clearly this is not an easy problem to deal with, even though it is perhaps the most pressing problem that we have facing us. Thirdly, I want to thank you for being here post-lunch. I was in a dilemma whether it's a better thing to be speaking before lunch or after lunch, and I concluded neither is the best option. But nevertheless, I'm going to take a few minutes of your time to try and give you what I believe could be a way to reimagine how we govern water in our country. What we've been hearing through the morning is a lot about very innovative, interesting solutions, whether it's technology, whether it's business models, whether it's dealing with sanitation and wastewater. But at the end of the day, if you watch our television news channels in the evenings, which I seldom do actually, but if you do watch them, the one word that keeps coming up all the time is governance. And like it or not, we live in a society. And no matter what kind of solutions we come up with, ultimately it has to fit into the way the society works, runs, functions, and deliberates. So I want to present to you a vision of how we could rethink, reimagine water governance in India through participation, innovation, partnerships, education, and integration. I'm going to skip through this. I represent, as Chitranshu just mentioned, a research institution called the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, and our aim is to integrate all of these issues in the policy advisory work that we do within and outside India. I'm going to skip through the kinds of initiatives we run throughout the world. But let's start with water and human development, because it touches upon what was being shown in the film. What do you think these numbers mean? Anyone wants to take a guess? And I'll give you a hint, it's not related to water. But something... Sorry?
Population.
Population, okay, good. It's somewhat related to population, yes. It's also per capita something, that's right. It's actually energy usage per capita in different metrics of kilograms of oil equivalent and kilowatt hours. Why I say that is a lot of the water that is used is for power generation. So that's how it kind of divides up around the world. First picture is from Britain, then there's India, the United States, and then China. And what do you think these numbers are, the last set of percentages? Now these do relate to water. These are the proportion of the population without access to improved sources of water and sanitation. Without access. So as you can see in the India and China case, the numbers are significantly higher. But why have I used a picture of, or 4 pictures rather, of children? It's because at the end of the day, we are all products of accidents of birth. We like to say that we are educated, qualified, went to such and such school, college, got certain degrees, but truly, it really depends on where we were born. And the fact that we just got darn lucky that we had access to a certain quality of water and a certain quality of energy, that basically allowed us to survive to the age of 5. Beyond that, whatever else we've got has a marginal impact compared to your first 5 years of life in terms of the life potential that you can achieve. And whether we get it or not, children certainly get it. I saw many of you seeing the pictures outside in the dining area, the paintings rather. And I took a picture of this painting by Darsita Jatakia from the 5th standard. And what I liked about it is it's perhaps the best depiction of how things could go wrong, where we start off from, where we are, and where we are headed. I have not really seen a better graphical representation of earth, water, ecosystem, human usage, municipal use, industrial use, agriculture. It's all in one picture. It's just a tremendous painting. And I'm sure some of you have already noticed it. And there were many others that were capturing that accident of birth and what time we are born in, where we are born, the intergenerational conflict over resources, the interregional conflict over resources, and the fact that our human development outcomes are very much linked to access to energy and access to water. We often talk about economic growth, and that economic growth will solve all the problems. To an extent, that might be a precursor to human development, but it's not enough. That graphic shows you, let's see if the laser pointer works here, that in terms of per capita income, say China is much higher than, say, Vietnam in terms of per capita income. But Vietnam has more people with access to improved sources of water than China does. That graphic shows you that India has a higher per capita income than Bangladesh. Bangladesh provides more sanitation to a larger proportion of its population. So clearly something is wrong. Economic growth is important, but not enough. And what happens is the poorer you are, you actually end up paying more for resources. Across the world, you're paying 10, 15, 16 times more per unit of water from tankers and other water vendors than if you were getting water off the tap. You saw a picture, a lot of clips about children collecting water. So a few years ago, I was making a documentary on water in southern Africa with this hip-hop artist called Jay-Z. So I decided, I said, we keep talking about collecting water. What does it really mean to collect water? So we walked down a hill, which was infested with snakes, and we were at the bottom of the hill, and as you can see, I'm not very big built, certainly not like Jay-Z. But I thought I'm better than a 12-year-old girl. So you can see the grimacing face I've got out there. And one reason I realized that it's not easy to carry water is because of the shape of the human skull. That bucket, as you can see, is flat. And clearly I'm not an expert at carrying water, so I didn't have any kind of clothing or cloth on my head. So I ended up not only spilling a lot of the water that I was trying to carry over a couple of kilometers, but also ended up scraping my skull. So collecting water is not child's play, but collecting water is children's work around the world. And from that stream, there are also animals drinking. It's not the cleanest water source. So that's how water and human development are connected. So what are India's water challenges? And now I'm going to throw in some numbers at you, which probably will be more boring than the exciting solutions you saw in the morning. But it's important to keep the numbers in mind, because that gives you, as the session is titled, the big picture. I've got a blob up there that says India's usable supply of water. And the reason I'm not actually put a number is because actually nobody knows. We have estimates, but nobody really knows. We say that we have about 1,180 billion cubic meters of water per year. So last year, when the 12th five-year plan was being written up, the Planning Commission had an entire working group working on this, on water data. And they came up with the statement that we could not find in Government of India records a single document which explained how that number had been arrived at. Okay? So let's assume that we have 1,180 billion cubic meters of water. And by some projections, that is going to be exceeded over the next 20 years. In addition to that big picture problem of the total quantum of water, the water stress that we'll face, is also the fact that in an economy like India, we are not going through a linear stage of development, that you do agriculture first, then you do industrialization, then you do services. Both in energy and water, the biggest challenge for India is that you've got your major sectors all having to grow simultaneously. So not only is the pie have to increase, but that competition between the shares of the pie will be problematic. But as was mentioned a little while earlier by Dr. Kulkarni from Jain Irrigation, most of the water is used for agriculture, over 80%. So what this graphic does is it actually tells you that in some states, the amount of water that is being utilized is more than what can be recharged through, whether it's from surface or groundwater. And in 20 of our 28 states, more irrigation potential has already been created than is left to be created. So you're already on beyond those of you who are economists, or you're beyond the hump and going down the slide. And what's more interesting is we keep spending crores of rupees in expenditure on irrigation systems. But the amount of water, or the coverage by irrigation systems has remained largely flat over the last few decades. So where that money is going is anybody's guess. But one consequence of that is that groundwater is being used exceedingly more for agriculture and other uses. There are about 25 million groundwater pumping sets. Again, don't take my word for it, because we don't know how many there are. This is just those that have been estimated. But there's a challenge that when we don't use water properly, we have poor yields. When we have poor yields, we have less revenue. When we have less revenue, you want to pay less taxes. When you have less taxes, you want to pay less for electricity. As a result, there's political pressure to not charge for electricity. As a result, there's an incentive to overuse the electricity for groundwater pumping. And that vicious cycle keeps going on. As a result, in some of our so-called agricultural powerhouses, we're already using more groundwater than is recharged on an annual basis. Punjab, Rajasthan, Haryana, and so forth. Now there's an even bigger picture to this, not just the India story. The fact is that globally we are coming up against a major resource constraint. I don't want to be Malthusian about this. The fact is that in terms of commodity prices, whether it's food prices or energy prices, we are at the highest levels in recent history. So much for that big picture on agriculture and food. What's happening within our societies, within our cities? This is data from the Ministry of Urban Development. I decided to do a survey of 423 cities around the country to look at sanitation. And clearly it assumed at some stage, at least starting out in that study, that some would be healthy or clean or recovering. But that wasn't the case. More than 99% of the surveyed cities were either in need of considerable improvement of sanitation or needing immediate attention. And then there's that other big picture of climate change, which we haven't talked about much. What that graphic shows you is that over the past half century, the amount of the world's regions that are now affected by weather extremes has now gone up from less than 1%, about 0.1%, 10% of the globe's surface has been covered by weather extremes. And that affects cropping patterns, it affects access to water, it affects food prices, and so forth. And then there's water use in industry. We tried to map where industrial clusters are throughout the country, and we found that many were severely polluted. And finally, as I started out by saying, a lot of water is used for energy generation. In fact, in industry, in the industrial subsector, about 87% of water is used for power generation. And in India, the power sector itself will account for 98% of additional withdrawal, 95% of additional consumption of water over the next 2.5 decades. So now very quickly, how can we start reimagining water governance in India? When it comes to irrigation, instead of that top-down story of let's build more canals and line it with cement, can we have a more participative approach to irrigation? Let me skip through some slides and just show you this one. There are a lot of what are called water user associations in India amongst groups of farmers. There were over 50,000 of them. But a handful of them are really functional for various reasons. But where they are, in parts of Gujarat, parts of Andhra Pradesh, etc., there has been tremendous change in the way the farmers have been trained through farmer field schools, how they participatively measured the water available, on that basis decided the cropping pattern and had an increase in productivity. And that's important because are we actually using our water, the limited water that we have, in the most efficient way? Some of our biggest wheat producing states are in the north of the country, that's fine. But some of our biggest rice producing states are also in the north of the country. And does that make sense? Does it make sense to be growing a water-intensive crop, although there are ways to cultivate rice differently from flooding the paddy field, but does it make sense to be growing it in parts of the country where it's not even part of the staple diet? A second way, what about innovations? So we've talked about a lot of innovations at the ground level in terms of urban water supply, but industry is a major user of water. And there are many solutions in terms of innovation which can save up to 90% of water in industrial plants. So what we can start doing, rather than creating more and more industrial clusters, start working with the existing industrial clusters as zones of sustainability. Try and target where more than 2 or 3 industries are co-located, where one's wastewater can be another's cooling water, etc. There are ways in which innovation can happen not just by inventing new things, but by just simply rethinking processes. Let me show you this graphic. We've been working a lot on solar power, and that sounds good. It's good for climate change, good for energy access. We decided to map some solar power plants. Anyone wants to guess what state this is? Okay, there's a district there. So these little orange and black circles are thermal power plants, coal-based power plants in Rajasthan. The orange part is what the capacity that's going to be expanded, and the black part is what's already functioning. And these tiny yellow dots are concentrated solar power plants. Now, concentrated solar requires per unit of electricity as much water as a thermal power plant. So we are building all of these power plants here. And guess what? The only water source is this blue line. Anyone wants to guess what that is? It's also on the picture. The Indira Gandhi Canal. So it's not Rajasthan's water, it's coming in from Punjab. So there's a challenge of interstate water transfer. And then you've got all these districts that are color-coded by groundwater situation. And you can see most of them are what are classified as overexploited. So even if you want to do something good for the environment, i.e. build solar power plants, you have to take into account the larger case for innovation. What kind of air cooling systems, etc. would you install rather than using the same water cooling that you use in existing power plants? And remember, we're also building a Delhi-Mumbai industrial corridor out here. So it's the same amount of water that has to keep circulating in that loop. It's not just one story. So agriculture, industry, now in municipalities. We always talk a lot about public-private partnerships. Is there a problem between privatization or public ownership? Point is, you're trying to manage water utilities as best as you can. And if you look across India, many functions of water utilities are already subcontracted to private players. And there are lots of models for public-private partnerships, except that the risk increases as you go down, as you go up, rather, the value chain. But there are other ways of innovating in the urban space as well, and we've heard about so many stories, and someone showed the example of the play pump. This is a play pump in southern Africa, in this place called in KwaZulu-Natal, about an hour's drive from where Mahatma Gandhi was thrown off the train. And these kids, these are the same girls that had gone down that hill to collect water. And this play pump, they play during school break, and the water goes up there. So why I'm showcasing this is that when we talk about public-private partnerships, let's not just think about a contract between the public utility and private players. Let's think about how a range of different actors, the guys in the slums, the big utilities, the private players can form a continuum of water service delivery. Otherwise, you'll be competing with business models and cannibalizing each other rather than really creating an ecosystem of partnership. And then, let's not even get started on the data problem. We'll hear about it later in the next session, I think. But let me just tell you a few facts about how we collect or don't collect water data in India. We say we are a grain-fed agrarian economy. We have no idea how much rainwater we use in agriculture. The Central Water Commission has a lot of gauging stations, but it actually measures water that's in the reservoirs rather than actual deliveries. States and center don't share water data with each other very easily. In many of our poorest states, minor irrigation is a big chunk of what water uses. There's no information about amount of water that is supplied. In terms of groundwater, it accounts for 10% of the national GDP, but we have very little estimations of actually how much water has been taken up. These are all based on assumptions. To give you one number, the ratio between the number of groundwater abstraction devices and the number of measuring stations is 500:1. And that's how an ideal water data collection system should be, right from the field up to all sorts of users. And that's how it actually is. All those dotted lines show how difficult it is to share water between different agencies, water data. And we've got this amazing thing called bona fide users. Now, who determines who's a bona fide user of water data? Would you like to know how much water is being used in Mumbai? Perhaps you do, but you're perhaps not a bona fide user unless you're sitting in IIT Mumbai. So we've got to make data on water absolutely democratized. There's no other way to try and deal with the water problem as saying we need to change consumer behavior, but you don't want to share data about water with consumers. And finally, you need to integrate all of these different aspects, the agriculture side, the municipal side, the industrial side, the sanitation side, in a different model. So let me show you something schematic. In any state, in any district, you have a water mix, you have an energy mix, you have different types of environmental challenges. And you try and solve for one, say provide water for agriculture, you have to take water away from somewhere else. And what you need to do is try and find those co-benefits, those solutions. And we've been working in the state of Bihar. We've been talking about minor irrigation, small farmers, 82% of India's small farmers, and in Bihar is 96%. So we said the big irrigation systems will never deliver water to these. So we started with making minor irrigation absolutely the central part of Bihar's growth strategy. You saw that little picture of those girls in collecting water in a pipe, collecting essentially the water vapor and then condensing it into the water pipe. This is a village in Dakshin Kannada district in Karnataka. And the reason I put this out is ultimately we can't forget who we are working for. This is a farm laborer who's too weak to go and work on the farm. He does not own this patch of land, it's inside a forest. But if you notice, there's a solar panel on the roof. There's a water channel. You can't see the droplet, but you can see the ripple in the bucket. He does not take firewood from the forest. He cultivates his own garden vegetables. So in one picture, you've got energy, environment, and water getting integrated. So let me just conclude with this. You can see that this picture is one of different tributaries merging into one river system. So basically, I've been saying that if we have to reimagine water governance in India, that's how we've got to take the different parts of it. The participatory strategies for irrigation, the innovations in industrial water savings, extended partnerships in municipal water supply, educating on water use by sharing the data, and then thinking about the institutional reforms for integrated governance. Thank you very much.